Welcome everybody to the 29th episode of Comic DNA, on which we will be discussing Skullkickers, volumes 1 and 2. We read 2 trade paperbacks for this episode. It was written by Jim Zub, illustrated by Ewin Huang, and colored by Misty Coats. First published by Image Comics in 2010. I am Aaron Walther, and with me today are 2 good friends and returning guests, Mr. John Parrish.
Hey, how's it going?
And Mr. Josh Blasingame.
Howdy do.
So, thank you both for being on the episode. As I said, we are going to talk about 2 books on this podcast. The first, Skullkickers trade paperback, 1,000 Opas and a Dead Body. And the second Skullkickers trade paperback, 5 Funerals and a Bucket of Blood. Now, basically, the reason we're talking about the 2 books is because, Josh, you had just recently read the second one, right?
Yes.
And you basically said we should do an episode of the podcast on Skullkickers, but I really want to talk about the second one. Or something to that effect, yeah. And I said...
I do like them both, but I do think the second one is actually better of the 2.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Yeah, I came across Skullkickers a few years ago. I'd heard about the book. Like, I kind of pay attention to like whatever Image is putting out, just because I'm interested in whatever indie books they got going. And actually, the first time I'd really really kind of been turned on to Skullkickers was actually in the first professional review of my own comic, Zero's Heroes, and the reviewer compared my book to Skullkickers favorably, I might add.
Okay.
They said that the humor was similar to Skullkickers, so I was like, well, I guess I better read this Skullkickers book and find out if I'm completely ripping off Jim Zub or not.
Right.
Turns out I'm not. His book is much better, but not fishing for compliments. I'm just saying.
I was going to agree with you.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. And he was a good friend.
Good friend.
Good friend. John, when did you first read or get turned on to Skullkickers?
Let's see. Well, I had heard of it for a while, but I'm trying to see, because when did it first came out in like 2010? You said,
2010,
right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, like I think by the time it came out, I was already overseas.
Mm-hmm.
But I think eventually they put it online, like they had put it out as a webcomic.
Yes.
I can't remember the name of but it's like a network of webcomics, and sometimes they would have like Image titles.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like the first time I actually saw it, because whatever the network was, like I would go on there and look at different stuff. So I started reading it then, and then when I finally got home, I made sure to go out and get like the actual books. So I went and I think I went to C2E2, and Ewin Huang and Misty Coats were there.
Okay,
so I went
cool.
and picked up both the treasure troves and got them signed.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
But yeah, I mean, like I really liked it. Like I was like, yeah, when I was in Japan, I would try to read it as much as I could.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of that, humor and stuff, that's kind of what, like I said, I think I said this in an earlier podcast, or maybe after we were done, was like, that's kind of what my book, Cluster,
Clusterfuck,
yeah, what kind of pushed it, that kind of humor and that kind of just wackiness.
I was actually gonna say, I was gonna favorably compare Clusterfuck to Skullkickers also, just in terms of like the tone and just like the, I guess I hesitate to say wackiness, because I always hate that as a description for comedy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you definitely had a similar sense of humor to Skullkickers with Clusterfuck.
But yeah, so that's yeah. But I love the book. I think it's really good. I really enjoy it.
Now, Josh, you first read it. I believe I read the first book, and Josh and I, of course, for anybody who's listening, Josh and I are good, longtime friends. We've been friends for a long time. And so I read this book, and I was like, wow, this is a Josh kind of book.
Yeah.
I said, my friend Josh needs to read this book, and I was a Christmas present I gave you, right?
Yes.
So, and then not too long after, you got the second book, and
yeah.
So Josh, your initial reactions, would you say that I was correct in identifying this as a book that you would enjoy?
You are dead. You were dead on. Like I love the style. I love the writing is great, and I love the characters.
Mhm.
Like I don't know, it's just so much to enjoy from it. It's got that kind of wacky, zany humor, but also that almost comical violence that I do enjoy.
Yes.
In like role playing and
Mm-hmm.
games and stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, even the back, rated, teen reader 13, which includes alcohol, comic mischief, and cartoon violence. And by violence, we mean blood, heads popping off, a knee to the face, an arrow to the back, squirrel tossing, gut punches, window smashing, and giant ape wrestling. Yippee!
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I can't argue with that.
There's a gleeful irreverence to like any, like to all the violence and any like it does. This is a book that does not take itself seriously at all.
Yeah.
So I guess before we start talking in any more details, I'll just kind of explain like what Skullkickers is. And Skullkickers, basically, it's just a fantasy comedy, is how I think the most broadest way you could describe it. I would basically say it's a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Probably, I
I'd
played.
agree with that.
Yeah, I haven't played. John, did you ever play Dungeons and Dragons?
I had a friend that was big into it in college, and we played a couple games, but the guy that was the dungeon master, we eventually pissed him off so much that he just kind of stopped doing it. Because we were doing stuff like in the book, like we were doing stupid stuff.
I think that's like the story of everybody. Everybody who plays Dungeons and Dragons has a story similar to that. I've played a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons, not a lot. Josh, you've played a little bit too.
Yes.
And it's like I think a lot of stories will end up going like that, where like the players will play the game like it's Skullkickers the comic, like totally irreverent, just having fun and screwing around, and inevitably the dungeon master will just get so pissed off because they're trying to tell a serious story here,
Right.
But the characters like just decide to do the stupidest, most ridiculous things they can possibly get away with.
Right.
No
way your character's carrying Mountain Dew too.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So this definitely feels like a book. It's like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign where the characters, like the players, are completely in charge.
Mm-hmm.
So the first book is 1,000 Opas and a Dead Body. And it's a pretty basic story where our two main characters, I don't even remember their names.
Ralph and Rex.
Yeah, Rolf and Rex. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a huge bald human and a short hairy dwarf.
Rolf. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's pretty straightforward. They're mercenaries in this like fantasy Dungeons and Dragons world. And they kill monsters, they fight things, and they do it for money. And the first story arc is pretty straightforward. They just stumble into some epic plot where a necromancer is trying to raise a zombie army for nefarious purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And everything goes crazy, and in the end they have to fight like a giant demon. And then they kill it, and all is well.
Yeah.
They kill it in such a great way.
And I like that. That's where the title comes in.
Exactly. Yeah. Basically, they kill. That's such a. I'll just go ahead and say one of my favorite things about this book. We were talking about the sort of the irreverence to any sort of like seriousness. One of my favorite like comedic aspects of the book is the way they use onomatopoeias.
Mm-hmm.
To describe, like what's happening. So for those of you who don't know, an onomatopoeia is the word that is the descriptive sound effect that you see on a page, like pow, bam, crack.
The old Batman.
Stuff like that. So when somebody gets punched in the face, then it'll say like krakow, and whatever. And so like this book does a really good job of just using like words or phrases that aren't actually onomatopoeias. They're actual words, because an onomatopoeia isn't a word. It's just the sound spelled out.
Yeah.
So like I think like my favorite one is like when like the human, Josh, what's his name?
Rex.
When Rex is like sneaking up on somebody, and instead of a sound effect being like sneak, 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 like the onomatopoeia is just impending violence. Like it's just the words impending violence on the page.
Yeah.
Things like that. That's really good. And so the book gets its title off of that great big full page splash of the dwarf kicking the giant demon in the back of the head in the brain, and it just says skull kick. It's good. Let's see. So, what were we saying before I started doing the description?
Just telling what it was about.
Yeah, just like talking about like fantasy books, talking about like fantasy stuff. So, we've all said we played a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons. John, were you ever a big fantasy reader?
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Josh, other than Josh, I know you've read Tolkien.
And C.S. Lewis, and that's really about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, I'm not a big fantasy reader myself, although I guess I've probably read more than you guys. Like other than like The Hobbit, and I've read a few Michael Moorcock stories, and what's his name? I'm already forgetting it. Piers Anthony, I think. It was a long time ago. I went through a period where I was like, let me just read some fantasy stuff, and that was about it. But I enjoy a good fantasy, but I would never say that it's really been my thing. But Skullkickers, it's not so much the fantasy as it is just the comedic violence, I think, that works for me.
Yeah, I think. Because it's so unexpected, because a lot of fantasies are just so serious and they take themselves so seriously. Yeah. So it was like, from the stuff I've read, it's like it takes itself so serious and you're supposed to be so awestruck by the things they're laying before you. And in Skullkickers, it's just like, it's anything but. Like, right. They see this big town and they're just like, the background, it just sort of has people doing like little background voices saying things and like trying to sell stuff. And like, it's just really... it just takes all the awe out of it. Like, there's never anything where it's like, in the book, they're like, you need to be amazed by this, and this is really serious. Like, even when they have a giant demon, they're cracking jokes, and they're, screaming and trying to, like, get money and all that stuff. It works because it's kind of the opposite of what you'd expect from a fantasy.
Yeah.
It's not Game of Thrones or anything like that.
Right.
It does not take itself... seriously, at all.
At all, yeah. And that's kind of why I say it feels more like a Dungeons and Dragons game than like a fantasy story, because it's fun first. Like it's a game where it's a game.
A story.
It's a story where the characters feel like everything they're doing is just for the sake of fun. Like they're just having fun. And I do agree with you, John. I think that there is a tendency, especially in a lot of fantasy, to be like really serious in the story, and it's trying to be epic and sweeping and really get you caught up in how great it is. I have an appreciation for Tolkien, but I think that the Lord of the Rings books are pretty dang boring. And The Hobbit is great. The Hobbit book is great, but the Lord of the Rings books, I read them once, and I don't think I'll ever read them again.
Yeah, I think it's just, I don't want to say, it's like the branding, I guess. It's like Nike or something. It's like, oh, it's Tolkien, you've got to read it, and it's you got to hold it up in this reverence. And I think it's great, like, for what it is, but those books bore me. And I'll be honest, like, I read the first. Was it Dance of Dragons or Song of Ice and Fire, the first Game of Thrones book?
Oh, yeah.
I was bored to tears. Like, I like the show. Like, the show's cool, but, like, I read it, like, it was, like, I think it was actually sitting, like, in my house, like, when I first moved over to Japan, and it was, like, one of the first fantasy books I'd read in a long time, and it was boring to me. Like, I couldn't sit and read it, and I think that's kind of the problem with some of these, like, fantasy books. It's like there's a lot of name recognition and a lot of stuff where it's like, that book has been out for, years, so people are just like, oh, it's so great stuff. And it's like, it's good, but it's just like, it was wordy. I guess that's the thing, it's too wordy. And I guess that's why I also like this book, because it's a comic, so there aren't as many words.
Right.
And they're not as super serious and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think that fantasy writing generally has a tendency to be really wordy and really flowery. Like,
Well, I think that mainly comes from Tolkien.
I completely agree, and I think that generally comes from the fact that most fantasy is. The reason I think most fantasy is boring is because it is just people doing Tolkien. Like Tolkien created this fantasy world of Middle Earth, and now all fantasy books basically just have to be that. Like it's not. I don't know. I mean,
he did do a pretty impressive, amazing job.
Oh, sure.
With everything. But,
I think all like the. I think Tolkien is rightly held up as like a great fantasy writer, but I do think that like a lot of the fantasy writers that came after him, like the writers throughout the 60s and the 70s, they were pretty much all just doing
an impression.
Yeah, they were doing well. I don't necessarily want to say that, although I do agree to an extent. I think what it more is like Tolkien created the fantasy genre, and like the modern fantasy genre, and so all these writers, they might have had their own little styles and like things they wanted to write about, but they were still just writing in a fantasy world that was basically created by Tolkien. That the elves in their fantasy story are the same as the elves in Tolkien, and so on and so forth. That's what I'm getting at. So basically what you could say is that Tolkien created all the modern tropes for like the modern fantasy book. Yeah. And so that's why I think a lot of fantasy is boring, just because it's not interesting to me. And that's just because it's been done. Right. And it's kind of, and I'm not trying to like rain on anybody's parade. Like if that's what you like, that's what you like. I mean, but I mean that's why like I would get into a lot of like Studio Ghibli films. Like I love Miyazaki fantasy because it's not Western fantasy. Like it's a fantasy world that's different. But and I guess what I'm trying to round this all out into saying is that Skullkickers is doing the same thing, basically just playing in that classic fantasy world. It's got zombies, dwarves, elves, fairies, and it's all just kind of the what's that, Josh?
Just said goblins.
Oh yeah, goblins. Yeah, exactly. So it's all just kind of playing into the like traditional Tolkien style fantasy world, and I think that works really well with the sort of slapstick, irreverent tone of the book, because it's just playing off of all the things that you already know and just being a comedy.
Yeah.
In two books, they have not tried to set up any sort of deep backstory or this is the kingdom of the dwarves and
right.
Longbeard was the first king and his son begat short beard and then no beard, and they don't go into that. It's like, here's a dwarf, he likes axes, he likes to drink and punch things.
Exactly.
That's all you need to know. Go kill things.
Right. Go kick some skulls.
Exactly.
Which, by the way, I can't remember if I said it earlier, but Skullkickers is just like the coolest title for a book.
Like, oh yeah.
Like I really wish I would have thought of that. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So, one of the other things I wanted to talk about too was the art. Now, did you read the backup stories? They're in the first trade paperback that has the 2 copper pieces.
Oh yeah.
Those are the first. I believe those were the first 2 stories, and those were done by a different artist.
Was it Chris Stevens?
Chris Stevens, that's correct.
Yeah.
Good art, but definitely seems like it's more fantasy style art.
Yeah, what you'd expect if you saw like
a fantasy book,
or like a D&D type.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it looks like the kind of art I would expect out of like a D&D manual of like character types and
like a very detailed painted style. And
yeah, there's a little bit of like Frank Frazetta in his style.
Yeah.
I mean like it looks good, but I gotta say that Ewin Huang's style, like his animated cartoony style definitely plays to the comedy much better.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
Mhm.
I really like his facial expressions. I just like the way like everybody's like squinting all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And but that plays to the comedy really well, because then the few times when people like bug out their eyes or stuff, it like pops. So I think it really works. Another thing too that I wanted to bring up was I actually think this book has really, really wonderful coloring.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful.
And colorists are kind of get the short end of the stick in the comic book industry. Not as short as letterers, but who cares about letterers? We're not going to talk about them. I kid all the letterers out there though. But no, but I a lot of times like I hear a complaint like in comic book reviews and comic book when people talk about books, nobody really talks about the colorists, and they don't. A lot of times they won't even get listed in like the credits in a review.
Yeah.
I myself am guilty of that. Like a lot of times when we talk about books on this podcast, we're basically just talking about the writer or the penciler and the inker or the colorist. They don't get a lot of talk. So I made sure that Misty Coats, we put her up at the beginning of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
No, I really like the coloring in this book, and like there's a lot of like there's like stuff like there's a lot of stuff
Bright
that
colors.
Well, she's got a bright color palette, but I was gonna say actually there's like glowing stuff all over the place. There's always like somebody with glowing eyes, or a glowing weapon, or like a glowing. What's that?
The
Gold.
Gold.
glitter.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just browns and blacks and.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it is. It's a bright color palette. And it looks really good. And again, I think that really helps with the book's, like the tone and the style. Like when the dwarf gets sick.
Yeah.
And he like literally turns green. Like that looks good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was gonna say, I think for this book, I think the art and the coloring and everything, it just kind of really, really works well together. Like I think, I don't know. I think, Mystic does like a great job, and it just really fits and sets the tone. And like it's not just basic. There's like a lot of lighting, a lot of really well done. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a colorist, so I don't have the right jargon for it.
Right.
But it just, the color is great. The coloring is great. Like, it really fits the book. Mm-hmm. And it elevates the book, I think.
I think so, too. Because it really, like, it just gives it that more of a, it doesn't look like we were talking, comparing the art of the Two Copper Pieces stories. That looks like what I'd expect from a fantasy book.
Mm-hmm.
But the regular art by Edwin and Misty does not look like a regular fantasy book. It just looks like an animated comedy, and it just happens to be fantasy.
Yeah.
So I think that really helps the book play.
Yeah. There's like, and if this doesn't ever become a cartoon, I'll be so disappointed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's everything about it. It feels really animated.
Yeah. And I think it helps that, because I think Jim Zub, I think he's an artist.
Yes, he is an artist.
And they did, what was it Udon that does like the Street Fighter stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And so like they've got a lot of like people that have worked in like multiple avenues and animation and stuff like that. But it's like, he's an artist, so he can write for artists, and that also helps.
Yeah, I was gonna say that this, even like the coloring and the art style has that Udon feel to it, and it's very obvious that he is like connected to them. Like even if I don't know the intricate details like about anybody's working relationships, but it just would not. When I read that Jim Zub had ties to Udon, I was like, that makes perfect sense, because this just looks like similar to Udon, and like because I was buying those Street Fighter books for a while. Cool books, but yeah, they definitely have a unique look to them.
And And I think that's also something that helps the book stand out because, you know, when you see a lot of the books that Image, and not just Image, but when you see a lot of books like on a shelf or something at a comic book store, they do not have that look. Like the Udon books that I've seen are bright, colorful, you know, same style, and it just stands out from everything. So I think that's another thing that makes it just extremely unique. Like, it's just a very unique book. Like, the premise is fairly unique. The art is fairly unique. It's just really, and it's good. There can be, you know, books that are unique and then they kind of suck. So, you know, luckily this is not that.
I think another thing that kind of helps with the quote animated feel of the book is that it's I wouldn't really say that I don't know if I'd call it widescreen comics per se. That's kind of a buzzword that I think that gets tossed around a little too much sometimes.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, if you look at the pages, I think the average page has maybe 3 or 4 panels on it. So like the whole comic is lots of big panels, you know.
Yeah.
So it's lots of big panels, letting the action breathe, or letting the characters kind of like exist in their surrounding.
Yeah.
The pages are not very claustrophobic, you know. I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
No, because I was just gonna say, because one of the best pages like that describe that, and I just randomly turned to that I really like, it's the beginning of, I think it's chapter 3. Like after they get that save those people from the goblins, those poison people.
Yeah.
And then it's like them sitting underneath the stars in front of a fire, and it's like the full page. Yeah. And there's no words, no nothing. It's just the stars. But then it's like the dwarf, he's like, I'm starving.
Yeah.
And really, like, that page in any other book would have, like, a lot of exposition and a lot of caption boxes and, like, things explaining and them having a conversation. But, like, they let it breathe. And I think that really, you know, helps with the pacing and just...
For sure.
tells you, yeah.
I was just looking at those pages, too. And because that's the part of the story where the dwarf... I gotta remember his name.
Rolf. I was going to say, yeah, Rolf and Rex. But I was like, because I think before they got names in the story, because I don't think they get names until the end of, like, the first trade or something.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
They were just called, like, Baldy and Shorty.
They were just calling each other Baldy and Shorty. Yeah, I don't think they actually get named in the first book. The names were given in the second trade paperback, when the Wanted posters got put up.
Yes.
So, but yeah, like Baldy and Shorty...
like if you can't remember the names, you can go with that.
Exactly, yeah. But yeah, that scene where they're sitting around the campfire and you got like the big open sky. I mean, if you look at it, look at that page. You know, it's a really nice. What's that term? The angle.
Visual.
No. The Dutch angle.
Oh, like a worm's eye view type thing.
Well, it's like a worm's eye view, but it's at a Dutch angle. So the page, it's a really good composition, so that it, the orientation of the page, like it cuts, like the going straight up, it actually cuts diagonally across the page instead of like vertically across the page. Like if you're looking at the plane, like of the ground. And so the page is like perfectly split into thirds. Like 2/3 of it is the sky, and then 1/3 of it is them sitting around the campfire. And that does a really good job of setting up the scene where the Shorty starts hallucinating, and he sees the constellation in the sky, and it's the bull, and it starts talking to him, and you get that really great double-page spread of the hallucination. But yeah, I mean, like it's all like top-notch professional stuff.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead, Josh.
I was just noticed. I flipped to the end of the second trade in the epilogue. There's actually like Rex and Rolf are actually different characters.
Well, that's what I thought. Yeah.
But I was gonna say that's because I've read past that, but yeah, that's like they explain it. Like,
that becomes like a plot point. Yeah, because they put up the wanted sign for Rex and Rolf, and it's like, oh, that's their names because it's got like that looks like
very similar.
It's very similar, and then at the end, it's like the two guys that look very similar to them.
Yeah,
and it's Rex and Rolf. Yeah, so I thought that was the case, but I wasn't going to be sure because I've only read. This is actually one of the first like podcasts we've done where I've only read these 2 books that we're talking about. I haven't read further in the series. Most of the episodes,
Me neither.
yeah, most of the episodes that we do is stuff that I've read almost completely, and then we're just talking about like the first book. Because usually I'm doing it with somebody else who's only read like the first book. So this is a weird like tables turning here. I don't know what I'm talking about, and John has all the answers.
Because I've read the second volume, and I tried not to read too much ahead of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I try to because it's online still, I'm pretty sure. But I tried not to go too far ahead because I was waiting to see like when the last issues were coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So I've read up to the end of the second or the 4th trade. I think it's the 4th trade, and so I've only read I've only read 2 books, like 2 full books ahead of you guys.
Oh, okay, I got you.
So I know stuff, but I won't spoil anything for you guys.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do need to read the rest of Skullkickers because, like, I will say, speaking frankly, I like the book. I can't say that it's my favorite. I've got like a whole stack of stuff I need to read. I enjoy Skullkickers quite a bit.
And I think you'll enjoy like the next 2 books because it kind of goes a different. I mean, like you saw how it ends, like
right.
So it's like it goes into a completely different type of story.
Yeah, no,
it's fantasy, but it's going to be different.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like, and you can kind of get a feel for that, like having read the second book. That's actually one of the things I wanted to talk about. Was I really enjoy Jim Zub's storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And he does a good job of basically like building the first book, for example, 1,000 Opas in a Dead Body. He does a good job of like giving us the characters, then them getting wrapped up in like a major storyline for this story. Like there's just a beginning and an end to the story, but there is a little bit going on that is like set up for the next story. Mm-hmm. And it does the same thing in the second book. Then the second book story is all following from the things that were set up in this book, and then it sets up stuff for the next book. Mm-hmm. So it does a good job of serialized storytelling, but of just kind of like keeping you moving along and giving you little bits of information in the background, but it's still giving you like a solid beginning, middle, and end to a story. Like in the book, so it doesn't feel like the ultimate decompressed storytelling where it's like you just like you don't get anything out of the book because it's all just pages just like stretching out across like multiple books to get the whole story.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's a very good like if you just read like I think if you read if you read the first book or whatever, it's like you don't necessarily have to read the second one. No. You know what I mean? Like, it kind of, like there's kind of a little cliffhanger, but if you weren't gonna read it, it wouldn't like break anything or it wouldn't be a problem. It'd just be like, oh, there's this little cliffhanger, but really the main stuff is just wrapped up pretty much. With a nice little bow for most part. Yeah. Most of the questions and problems.
Yeah, I agree. So, Josh.
Yes.
What, like, comparing the first book and the second book, because I'll just say, I thought I saw an improvement in the second book, too. Mostly just because of the way the story was, like, progressing and building. I appreciated that the second book just, like, basically just continued immediately after the first book. Mm-hmm. So, Josh, what did you like about the second book more than the first book?
It didn't have to quite establish the characters. You always... Sometimes I enjoy like second or third seasons or second or third books more than the first one because you can they can focus more on the story instead of trying to set up, some of the details. Granted, they didn't really do that a lot in the first one, just because, like I said earlier, it was just 2 mercenaries go kill things. But I do believe it was definitely funnier. The the 5 funerals and a bucket of blood.
Mm-hmm.
The running joke of there are actually 5 funerals in it.
Yes.
And they all say like the exact same like eulogy, but it changes around.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Yeah.
It's done so perfectly that it just it gets me every time.
No, I agree. The same like page layout for the funeral, the same like the characters are all positioned in the exact same spots. And, no, it's great, and I love the way it just keeps like comedically cutting back to that. Like every time there's a funeral, it's just like, oh, bam, here's your funeral.
Right. So I definitely think it's funnier. Like I said, I really got to know and enjoyed the characters in the first one, and this is just more wacky adventures with them, and it does take it in a little bit of a different different, not really genre but area, because the first one was more like there's some werewolves and zombies and fairies and goblins and giant plant monsters. So yeah,
I agree. I do think the second one was a little funnier.
It felt a little bit more refined.
It did. It felt less. I mean, going with what you're saying, it just felt a little less generic. Like
yes,
like the first one, as we said, it was just sort of like playing in the like what you expect of a fantasy world, and I think the second one, it felt like it stretched its legs a little bit.
Yeah.
I loved. So yeah, I think there were 2 fantastic like running jokes that I loved in the second book.
I think I know what the second one is.
Well, yeah, the funerals thing was great. I think the part that I probably laughed out loud the most, actually, though, was the talking squirrels.
Yeah.
So, and that almost bugged me, I gotta say. And this was that whole like serialized storytelling, because that was one of those like setting up things that's going to obviously pay off in the future, but we're not going to get into it right now. With Baldy talking to the squirrel, and because basically in the story it's like the fairy folk have their plan, and they've got the forest creatures helping them out. So there's like birds and squirrels, and they're in the sewers. And
do we need to do the quick synopsis? Synopsi?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could say the basic synopsis of it is carrying over from the previous book. There's an assassin loose that we saw in the first book that killed a nobleman, yeah. And it turns out that assassin's big plan involves basically destroying the city, human cities, by bringing back the nature. I forgot what they called it. The Mother Marsh.
The Marsh Mother.
Yeah, Marsh Mother.
Something, one of those.
Yeah. And so, so that's basically the plan. Is they're just gonna kill the nobleman and then release like a giant plant monster that's gonna just sort of like destroy the city and bring back all the forest creatures and let them live in harmony in nature, as it was before mankind came and started destroying things and putting up stone walls and whatnot.
Right.
But so that's like the fairy folk are flying around, and the assassin is she's a fairy or an elf.
She's like an elf.
She's an elf, but she's like connected to the fairies in some way. And I love the scene where Baldy and Shorty are in the sewers because they're looking for the assassin, and he finds a squirrel, and Baldy starts talking to the squirrel, and he's like freaked out because he's like, "Oh my god, a talking squirrel!" And the squirrel's like, "Oh my god, a talking human!"
Right.
I don't know. That just like killed me. That just cracked me up to no end.
And the dwarf can't hear anything.
And the dwarf can't understand it. Yeah, all he hears is squeak, 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 squeak coming out of both of them.
Right.
Because I was gonna say, and that was the part of the thing, was that the setup for that, like, it's so subtle that people could like miss that one little part where the lady, the little
Mother Nature, or
the Mother Nature lady, like when she shakes his hand, but it's like that little thing, and it's just like little bit of magic, like right around the hand, like. A bunch of people probably missed that the first time around.
Yeah. I did miss it the first time around.
But I kind of like the subtlety of it. Like, you have to go back and be like, why is he talking to us? You know.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I like that.
Though that becomes the thing. The little old lady that was like working in the inn, and
she turns out to be like Mother Nature.
Or something like that. She's some kind of forest spirit, and so she's helping Baldy and Shorty, and because she gives Baldy back his gun, because that's like, I guess that's I was gonna say that's my other favorite joke.
Yeah,
I love that gun.
I knew you were gonna love the gun stuff, Josh. Yeah, the gun stuff was hilarious, and the talking squirrels was also hilarious. But I did love the whole thing with the gun. Basically, it's a fantasy world, and like people don't really know what guns are, but they sort of exist. Like, because he's got like, it's like a revolver. It's it's a fantasy weapon. Like it exists, but nobody really uses them. And the whole scene of like when the soldiers are searching their hotel room and they find the gun and they don't know what it is, and they keep accidentally killing themselves with it.
Yeah.
And they think it's like cursed.
Yeah.
That's
if it looks at them, it'll kill them.
Yeah. That's really well done.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a really funny scene.
Yeah, that's a great scene. But that scene also kind of like is a good example of, I think, one of my favorite, just like the comedic tone and the comedic style that Jim Zub goes for. I really love the way, it's a fantasy world, but like the characters have sort of a bit of like a modern slang to the way they talk. And I love the way, again, going back to the whole like complete irreverence, I love the way like the soldiers and other characters will backtalk to somebody, like when they tell them to do something like obviously suicidal, like, oh, there's a monster over there, guards, go get it, and the guards are all like, fuck you, I'm not going over there.
Yeah,
things like that. I like in like a standard fantasy, the captain of the guard goes, guards, go get it, and then we get an action scene and all the guards die and it's sad. But in this one, the guards are like real people. They're aware that if they go fight a monster or a whatever, they're gonna get killed and they're not gonna do it.
Right.
I like that in the first book. That was actually probably one of my favorite jokes in the first book, was when Baldy and Shorty were fighting off the goblins and they saved the merchants. And they were trying to like extort money out of them. Basically, they were like, we saved your life. Now give us money, food, and a horse. And the merchant's like, well, my guards here would beg to differ. And the guards are like, fuck you, we're not fighting that guy. Just pay him already.
Right.
Yeah. Because I was like, that scene, and then the one I really liked was like after the whole big, slaughter scene, and when they're like guests. And all those dignitaries or whatever start dying from the fair. Like the guards come in and they like bust through the window and they're like after them. And then the one guy's like, "What? No, you go after them."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He's like, "No, you do it. I'm not going after them. They just killed a bunch of people." Yeah, that's that exactly that irreverent tone. Where like I said, a standard like movie or serious book, the guards are all just like throwaway people who have like no concept of their own mortality. But in Skullkickers, they're red shirts, exactly, they're red shirts.
Yeah.
But in Skullkickers, everybody is constantly like, I'm not going to do that. I'm gonna die.
They have personality, and they have like at least some sense of self-preservation, which kind of humanizes them. It makes them seem like. It doesn't make them seem like, oh, these are just stock characters in the background, because like you'll have them having conversations, like they had the one where they're talking about like the caste system or something like that.
Oh yeah.
And like talking about the one guy, and they're like, oh, he's a plebeian or something like that. But it's like they have, it makes it more believable that these characters have lives outside of the story.
Yeah, it
rather
does.
than just guards that show up and get stabbed, and then it's like, oh well, they didn't talk, they didn't, they just say yes sir and marched on to death. If you have guys that are like, hell no, I'm not fighting that guy, or
right.
No, this and that, it like makes them more believable as characters, and they're minor characters, so that's like, that's impressive as a writer, because some writers don't do that.
Right, exactly. And it's like it's played up for the comedy, but it also works really well to just like, I don't know, it's what makes the book more fun instead of just like your serious, like you said, just giving the characters agency, just kind of like, I don't know. makes it more fun and refreshing. I guess is what I should say.
No, definitely.
Mm-hmm. So both the books, the first book and the second book, end with a giant monster destroying a city, and then they have to fight it and find a way to stop it and kill it. So, John, you've read more Skullkickers books than Josh and I. Does every book end with a giant monster destroying a city?
I'll put it like this. Let's see. The third book, I think the third book does. The last book I read does not.
Oh, okay.
But I don't want to spoil.
Well, that's
things,
fine.
But
you don't have
like,
to spoil it.
Yeah. But what I do like is that in the first two books, the ones we're talking about, like I like the method of dispatching of the monsters.
Oh,
it's always like it's very unconventional, which works for the story. Like especially the second one is basically they just got Panky, and
the
Goblins who can't die.
I really liked that. See, again, talking about like the book really felt like it stretched its legs in the second book and kind of like it was pretty clever storytelling, I thought. I liked that, like all the scenes like were like by themselves, they were like funny, good scenes, but then they all actually came together for like a really good, like coherent story. Like I really
at the end.
I'm sorry, what was that?
No, I said like meeting all those characters, like the merchant and his like wife or whoever, and then book. Panky and all those characters. Like it pays off at the end.
Exactly. Like it all came together like really well.
It ties together.
Yeah. More than I expected. I gotta say, not just only because as a comedy, a lot of times you don't need to bring things together because it's just a comedy, right?
Right.
But this actually, like all the characters that felt like they were one-off characters, like for example those the merchants who were making the poison, they felt like they were just one-off characters just for that scene. But then like they came back in the second book and it worked really well. And Panky as the thieves, the king of the thieves or whatever. The
Thieves Guild.
That character, I actually really liked that character, and like that scene by itself, where they first introduced him, was a really great scene because it was all, it was just all juxtaposing your expectations. So like they go in and they're like, "Who's in charge here?" And the one guy's like, "No, that's me, and we're all gonna kill you." And then he just like gets a knife in the head. And Baldy and Shorty are like, well, I guess now we're in charge. And that's like the comedy there is the juxtaposition of like you thought there was going to be a big fight, but then there's not, and that's why it's funny because these guys are just badasses. And then there's even more juxtaposition because Panky gets up and he's like, you don't think I'd be the leader of the thieves if I, couldn't take a simple knife to the head. Something like that. And that's when they establish that he can't die. He's got this like immortal
magic.
Yeah, magic. Yeah, that magic, the onomatopoeia, like it's good. But then it all comes together really nicely with they meet the poison merchants and they just like use Panky's body, which cannot die, to just soak up all the poison. And he keeps dying and coming back to life and then drinking more poison. And then they just dump him in the giant plant. Vampire plant that's destroying the city and kill it. It's great.
Seymour.
Yeah, Seymour. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I thought the second book it actually like played on the first book more than I expected it to. So it's good. I mean, I need to read the rest of the series, obviously.
Yeah.
Especially. Oh, go ahead, John.
No, I was just like, because like you said, like from the first book to the second book, it just kind of picks up eventually where it left off, and then so the next book, spoiler, not really, but it takes place on a boat, a pirate ship.
Yes.
So it's like,
that's how the book ends with them.
So it picks up right after that, and then you have that whole story.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah, it's a good story. It's fun. It's But it just kind of it builds though, and that's the thing. It's like it builds, and like it started out in this little town, or like Mudwich, which is like this little apparently crappy town, and then they go to the capital or whatever, and then they go on a boat, and it's just like it just like the world gets bigger.
Right. Yeah.
but the books themselves essentially stay tight, I think.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, the storytelling is pretty tight.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think it's was the final issue of Skullkickers just recently solicited, or did it actually come out?
I think it's out already.
That's the
but
kind of thing I should have researched before starting this podcast, but I don't.
Or just edit in
Or
later.
I'll just edit it in later. Yeah, probably not. I'm a lazy editor. I'll tell you that much right now. But yeah. Oh, go ahead, John.
No, because I think the last book was called like Skullkickers 100 or something like
Yes.
that. But there aren't
100. There's only like 40 some, maybe 30 issues. That I was gonna say that actually was what always had me like in tune to Skullkickers was occasionally reading the comics news. I don't keep up with a lot of I don't buy a lot of monthly books, but I do try to keep up with the news and whatnot. And I always enjoyed reading about Skullkickers in the news. I thought Jim Zub had a great sense of humor about his book. And like this is a few years ago when they renumbered like every issue with a new number 1. Yeah. And because I was like, oh, that's really funny. I guess I should read that series. And I eventually did, but I wasn't reading it at the time. But I just loved that. It was like they were like Uncanny Skullkickers number 1, and
and they were all like not mocking, but parodying old classic covers, like classic number 1s and stuff.
And then so for the final issue, they did Skullkickers number 100, the anniversary issue or something like that. But they just renumbered the issue. Like, great jokes. Jim Zub obviously has a good sense of humor.
And I think it said, or at least according to the Skullkickers website, it came out in June this year.
So it did like just come out like this month.
June 24th. So
yeah. So So like that last Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least according to the website, that's when it came out.
Yeah. But can you believe that I guess I can, but Skullkickers, it was hard for me to do research because I'm a lazy researcher, and Skullkickers doesn't have a Wikipedia page, which basically meant I didn't do any research on this book.
Yeah, I think you had to go to
their official website.
Their official website, yeah.
Now, I do actually read a lot of Jim Zub's website. John, I don't know how much of his blog posts you've read.
Oh, yeah.
But Jim...
With Zubtails?
Yeah, Zubtails...
Yeah.
Zub does a lot of great blogging, and he writes a lot of great books about... like making comics and the industry, and he actually gets a lot of press for that too. I mean he's been getting a lot of good high profile work lately, but I mean there was a time where he might have been getting more attention because of his books about because of his blog posts about the comic book industry than he was for like Skullkickers for his book that he was putting out. Because I know that for a period of time, pretty early on, Skullkickers sales were pretty low. Because that's one of the things they talked about, just like the economics. He's got all these great blog posts about like the economics of putting together a book, and he's pretty open about I mean, he's not giving you like exact figures, of like what he's making, but he's pretty open about like the percentage of like this much money goes to the Diamond distributor, this much goes to Image, this much goes to whatever like that. So I've been reading his blog posts for a long time. I actually had been reading them before I read Skullkickers, just because as a wannabe comic book writer who doesn't want to be a wannabe comic book writer, that's the kind of thing that you have to read.
Oh yeah. And he does a great job of laying it out for people and stuff like that. And I think it's really interesting because as now, online, you had all these artists and writers and people throwing out figures and being more open with, their economics and the finances and the sales and percentages and things this year. There were a ton of posts. Yeah. But he had been doing it years ago.
He's been doing it for years and years and years.
Yeah, so it's funny that people are like, oh, this person is so, forward thinking and is, really laying it out there. And it's well, Jim wasn't giving figures, he wasn't giving exact figures, but he was laying this stuff out and it wasn't just one post. It
Right.
was like
a whole
months
series.
and-
yeah.
Right.
So, but yeah, like I think, yeah, he's got a good sense of humor, and I think that's another thing that probably, you have to have a good sense of humor to want to write comics, because,
I
Yeah.
think so. Yeah.
it costs.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's not a. I mean, I guess making a comic book is cheaper than like making a feature film. you
Yeah.
know, but whatever. That's.
But in terms of like just the comic book industry in general, it's like
Yeah.
I mean everything costs. But I guess when you look at comics and like when you start out, you're like, oh man, oh I could do that. Like some people they just look like, oh I just find somebody and we draw a comic, and then it's like, oh well you want to print it,
Yeah.
you got to do this, and like if you really want to do it, it's like this is what you have to do. This is how much money you have to spend, and just that whole thing of learning like, oh. Damn. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Jim Zub is an excellent resource for that. So anybody who's listening to this and doesn't already know about Jim Zub's blog posts, I recommend you just read all of them. Like he's a fountain of information.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to read the rest of Skullkickers. I also really want to read Jim Zub's Samurai Jack comics.
Oh yeah. I haven't read them.
Good.
Yeah, I haven't read them. I don't want to sound like the villain of the comic book industry, but I don't really read monthly comics anymore, and I'm waiting for the trades. I'd rather buy a nice hardback collection than have an issue. So
Then you got to get the bags and the boards.
exactly,
Yeah.
It all adds up. But I am such a huge fan of Samurai Jack, and the comics look cool, and I mean. After reading Skullkickers, I've got faith that Jim Zub knows what he's doing when it comes to Jack.
Yeah.
So I'm sure
And I
they're
think
good.
I think it was getting a lot of like
It was
good
getting
reviews
really
and
good
a lot
press.
of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, Phil Lamar liked it, so that's enough for me.
There you go. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I guess we kind of like derailed there for a little bit, but that's all right. Anything else you wanted to say about Skullkickers? The first two books.
I think it's just a good book. It's like, there are people out there that are like, oh, I'm tired of superheroes and I'm tired of reading this. I'm like, well, this book is out and it's, the last issue apparently came out last week.
Right.
So it's done. It's complete. You don't have to worry about, any tie-ins or crossovers or whatever, the stuff you're tired of at those other places. Then you can come read this,
Right.
be humored, laugh, and have an enjoyable story, and you'll have a complete story. I mean, and I'm pretty sure they said the third treasure trove comes out in August. So it's like, even if you don't want to, then you get these 3 big ass hardcovers, and you can read the full story.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna have to get those, I think.
I was like, they're pretty big, and like, cause I bought them, like I said, I got them at C2E2 from Ewin Huang and Misty Coats. And they were so heavy in my backpack.
Just walking around the whole convention with them.
Yeah,
Oh,
I made the
boy.
mistake of getting those books first. So, like, the more stuff I went and picked up, it was just like the books themselves. I think they're like, it felt like, they're like a good. It's not like they're not like 5 pounds or 10 pounds or anything crazy. But I mean, when you're thinking of comic books, you don't expect them to be this big. But two
Right.
of them at the same time, like, they're legitimately heavy. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Notes to remember for future comic book conventions. Well, I tell you what, nowadays I see people at cons. And nowadays, people know how to do it. They all have like rolling suitcases that they put all their books in. Like I see so many people walking around a convention with like a little cart, just with like a long box on it that's just like filled with comics that they're just taking around to get signed. Yeah, I mean I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to carry around like a backpack with a bunch of hardcovers and whatnot in them. It adds up.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So yeah, I definitely think that Skullkickers is a book that I was gonna say I wonder if it finds its audience in like regular comic book readers Because like I feel like this is a book that like the types of people that like are just like modern day geeks, you know, people that play video games, people that enjoy like that go see all the Marvel movies. They don't really read comics, but if you know they play games, they play Dungeons and Dragons, they watch movies, they play video games. I feel like this is a book that like would be perfect for them, you know, because it's all like kind of tied in to like styles that you're familiar with, but it doesn't feel like it's not like a standard superhero comic book, you know. It's just it's just action adventure, but you know, for Dungeons and Dragons nerds.
Yeah, and I think I think it'll be one of those things like, you know, how people like stuff happen, you know, stuff comes along and then it goes off and then people like discover it later and then they, you know, they love it and it blows up, but it's been, you know, over for like The Wire. Like I've seen a bunch of conversations about The Wire. Like The Wire came out in like 2004 and then it was like out of nowhere like a couple years ago, or at least before I left before I left for Japan, it was like suddenly, you know, the series had been over, and then all of a sudden, like, people are talking about it, and it's everywhere, and now it's one of the greatest series of all time type thing. Yeah. I feel like with Skullkickers, like, not like it's gonna be like, you know, up there with Watchmen or whatever, you know, like, I mean, in time, but it'll be one of those things that in the future somebody might stumble across it and it'll find its audience. It just hasn't found that. I guess that's kind of what
I'm saying. I feel like its audience hasn't found the book yet, and like it's sad saying that like the week after the book has ended and you know they've published their final issue, but I do feel like it's the kind of thing that's like waiting to really take off with you know like its like target audience.
Right. But I think because Jim Zub, like, he's got a lot more higher profile stuff. Like, the more higher profile stuff he does, like, you know, the more people will discover it. And, hey, maybe even some people who maybe hadn't heard of it or knew about it can hear this podcast and be like, oh, well, maybe I should give it a try.
Yep. Well, I definitely recommend it.
Yeah.
All right. I think that about will cover it then.
Did you get Josh's opinion?
Oh, yes. Josh, did you have anything? I'm so sorry.
Everything that John said. No, I mean, I really liked it, and yeah, it's a great action fantasy comedy that just, it's, you know, we've said everything I've needed to say.
Right.
Pick up the book. It's really good.
Definitely. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to our podcast about Skullkickers. I am Aaron Walther. You can find me on Facebook. You can also find me on Twitter at AAWALTHER. That's AA Walther at Twitter. You can find comics that I have written on my two websites, newhavencomics.com and aaronwalther.com. And you can also buy a science fiction anthology that I do, that Josh also has a book that we write together called Time Agent Z. It's in Science Hero, which is available on Comixology right now. So 4 issues of Science Hero are on Comixology. And also, as always, you can find new episodes of this very podcast at comicdna.podbean.com, or you can find us on iTunes. Just search for Comic DNA. John?
Okay, you can find me on my Facebook page, John Parrish Comic Writer. You can find me on Twitter at John_H_Parrish. I'm the only one. So if you just type in John H. Parrish, I should show up. You can find my website is secretsandshadows.net, and you can see a couple different comics I have up there. And I have a new comic that just recently wrapped up called Clusterfuck, and it is available on Comixology, Google Play, and most digital outlets.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, I cannot say what the next episode is going to be because I don't know 100% what it will be, but I'll probably just edit that in this part later on. But thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will see y'all next time.